Can the Miami Heat go on yet another deep playoff run and find a way to win the fourth championship in franchise history? With the start of the regular season just days away, we break down possible X factors, their toughest competition, and what needs to go right for Miami's path to the NBA Finals on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat, however you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Got a fun show today. We're going to do a deep dive on how the Heat can go ahead and win the Eastern Conference and get to the NBA Finals. We're going to talk about what has to go right and some of the biggest X factors for the Heat in a minute. But let's first take a look at the competition in the Eastern Conference, David. And I'm going to go ahead and just use the BetOnline odds that we have right now for favorites to get out of the Eastern Conference, just as a way to organize things. Boston, favorites in the Eastern Conference at plus 275. Milwaukee, second favorites at plus 325. And then it's Brooklyn at plus 425. Philadelphia at plus 650. Miami at plus 850. Cleveland, I thought this was interesting, plus 1,200. And then you've got a big group of other teams, Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago, the Knicks after that. But that's basically your top 8 there. What struck me as interesting about this, and I do want to discuss how the Heat match up against these teams in potential playoff settings, but what struck me as interesting is that Miami is, like Boston and Milwaukee and Brooklyn are kind of like lumped together in terms of the Vegas odds at the top. Yeah. There's a pretty steep drop-off from Brooklyn to Philadelphia, and then an even steeper drop-off like between that group and Miami, obviously. The difference between like Boston, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Philadelphia is minimal, but Miami is closer to Cleveland in those odds. It's 350 point difference there with the Vegas odds than Miami is to Boston or Milwaukee, right? Boston and Milwaukee are almost twice as better or worse odds, however you want to look at it, than Miami is. So do you think that's fair? Do you think that Boston and Milwaukee in that kind of upper tier is that much better, even on paper, than Miami is, compared to what the difference is between Miami and Cleveland, which is minimal compared to those other teams?
I don't think it's fair, but I think it's to be expected considering the top talent on Miami's roster is barely considered a top 10 player. Like, you make a strong case for Jimmy being 10, maybe 11-ish. I think the most recent top 100 poll via The Athletic puts him at 11 overall, Bam at 30. So when you look at that kind of disparity, you've got two players in the top 30, not particularly great. Joel Embiid, a top 1 player. Giannis Antetokounmpo, maybe the best player in the league. Jason Tatum, top 5-ish, top 7-ish, depending on how you feel about his overall game. And that's how it basically stacks out. Kevin Durant, obviously historically great player. You look at the best player in Miami's roster, and it's not, Jimmy isn't technically quote unquote good enough to warrant being one of the top teams or viewed as one of the top teams in the league. Miami depends on, and usually gets a lot of success because of so, depends on their depth, players stepping up, a wider range of players that can step up on a night-to-night basis. They don't count nearly as much on Jimmy having these monstrous performances as other teams that count on, Giannis to have a big game, et cetera. So I think that's where the disparity comes from. I don't think it's in terms of talent, which to me has always been a problematic term because it's so hard to describe and to define, like, what is talent? Every player in the NBA works at an incredibly high level. Is it just God-given athleticism or whatever you want to describe it? It's just, talent has always seemed so vague to me that I've never quite understood why we look at more talented teams. Miami always finds a way to succeed despite the prognostications or, so many people counting them out already just because of the loss of PJ Tucker, overlooking the fact that almost on an annual basis, they always find somebody who steps up and plays at a high level. So I think that's the problem right there, is that Miami may not seem.
I mean, you made a good point about Jimmy Butler that I want to circle back to. It's he's at 11. ESPN ranked him at 16 or 17. I think Sports Illustrated had him at 10. I think 11, 10 makes sense for Jimmy Butler. But then you ask people around the league and you ask people who cover the NBA and you said, okay, sure, let's put let's just call Jimmy Butler the 15th best player in the NBA. You know, like whatever. If you think ESPN has him at 16 and you think that's right, okay, let's make him the 16th best player in the NBA. Are there 15 players that you want over Jimmy Butler in the playoffs? And the answer is 100% of the time, no. There is not. I can't name 15 players that I'd rather have in the playoffs. Do you think James Harden is a better player? Maybe during the regular season. Maybe you still do. I think the MVP days of James Harden are still over, but you could argue he's still a top 15 kind of guy. Would you rather have James Harden than Jimmy Butler in the postseason? No, not ever. There's not a single year where that has been so. And so I think that's sort of the interesting thing about the Heat is when you look at them as a playoff team all of a sudden, when you propose, okay, like, again, I agree with these odds. I think these look right. I think Brooklyn is getting a few too many points here. I don't think they should be getting that much benefit of the doubt, but whatever. We're splitting hairs there. But if you kind of think about the Heat in a playoff setting, then I think it feels a little bit closer. And I think that's why you even have the Heat kind of getting the deferential point of view here. We're looking at them in terms of a top 5 grouping here, because obviously they were in the Eastern Conference Finals, a shot away from making the NBA Finals. But then, they're pretty substantial. Like, they have better odds than Cleveland and Atlanta. I know you don't like the word talent, but when you just sort of look at the all-star level kind of guys that Cleveland has, that Atlanta has, you could argue they have more guys than Miami, right? And obviously they made some exciting moves in the offseason and stuff like that. So I do think that the odds build in a little bit of deferential, like, kind of, okay, the Heat are always going to compete. Yep. There's something built into the odds. Let's talk about the playoffs, though, because I just mentioned it. The Heat have overachieved in the playoffs, I think, based on the odds going into each season, right? Like, Miami was not a top 2 favorite in the Eastern Conference going into last season, and yet there they were in Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. Let's look at Boston since they're at the top. What are your thoughts on a potential Boston-Miami playoff matchup? I don't mean to jump ahead here, David, but when we're talking about a roadmap out of the Eastern Conference, which is what this whole show is about today, this is the kind of thing that we have to look at. What do you think about a potential matchup between Boston and Miami?
I don't know that Miami can count on what happened last year as being an accurate gauge of what needs to happen this year in order for them to get past Boston. Like, it counted so much on Jimmy having these incredible transcendent level performances. And I don't know that that's the right recipe for Miami to follow this year. Like, you need a wider distribution of productivity.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be like a pyramid, it can't be it's just Jimmy at the top and then everybody else kind of trickling in and chipping in from time to time. It needs to be a much more wide range of who's stepping up on a night-to-night basis.
Tyler Herro just had a quote somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but saying if he wasn't injured, if he was more right physically in the Eastern Conference Finals, he thinks that they get through. Because, and that's the thing about Tyler Herro, right, is at best, when you kind of consider if he's 100% healthy and playing at his optimum level, he is exactly what Miami needed in the Eastern Conference Finals, which was half-court shot creation. But you don't think that we could count on the Heat getting a transcendent kind of performance from Jimmy Butler. And the reason it's transcendent is because it's so rare. Right. And if it's rare, you can't count on it. So I agree with you 100%. Not saying Jimmy can't do it, but you just can't. You also don't want that to be, okay, that is kind of the thing that has to go right. Like, we're going to talk about later.
Fallback. Oh, right. Jimmy, go roll out 50 points and let's see if Bam gets 20, if Tyler's healthy and gets 15.
And I know from the Heat point of view that we talk about that all the time. Oh my gosh, what a great performance from Jimmy Butler. I can't believe they almost came back in Game 7. Let's not also discount the fact that the Celtics completely collapsed at the end of Game 7, right? Like, they had execution issues and all those things. And I do wonder that after getting over the hump, getting to the finals, which had been so close so many times, and then losing the finals in the way that they did, another collapse, I do wonder if they're able to kind of bounce back and rally and just sort of get over that mental hurdle of late game execution. This is a team that is young but maturing. They added they added some new pieces, Malcolm Brogdon, things like that. That should be helpful in those kinds of settings. I don't think that we could count on Boston just almost having a historically bad collapse at the end of Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals either.
But I'm not penciling him in either. Like, I'm not. I know that they made some upgrades, and I can see why they would be. They have their own path to the finals, and yes, I could see that happening for them. But I'm not quick to say, oh, that's a automatic shoe in there. Like, Brogdon. Look, Brogdon was available for a reason. The injury concerns are realistic. Who knows what they're going to get out of him, out of a long regular season where they might rely on him. Marcus Smart is prone to injury. You're relying on Tatum to take that leap again. You're relying on Brown, who I think is a star, taking that leap again. And who knows, after that, Robert Williams' bulky knees might not be available in the playoffs.
A big thing for Boston's turnaround after January was health, right? They were 100% healthy for that up until the NBA Finals, basically. And so I agree with you.
And
you
don't
can't really
overlook
count
the
on Boston
coaching situation either. Like
that's
a problematic thing there. I mean, not
yeah.
only is that going to dog them for the rest of the season as far as drama and locker room tension and things of that sort, that constant probing and asking from reporters, because that's just a reality. Wherever, whatever city they're going to go to through December, they're probably going to get asked about it to some degree.
Yep.
But then he has a pulse of that team, even after just one season, that was help guide them during the rougher parts of the season. They had to steer the ship correctly after a tough stretch. They got healthy, as you said, and yes, things started working out. Who knows if is it Joe Mazzulla?
Joe Mazzulla. And yeah, I mean, he was a finalist for the Jazz job, but we'll see. A lot of the reports coming out of Boston are that they're good with them. I wonder if we may be overblown the coaching issue, but you're right. Like, Ime did such a good job. He was top 3 in Coach of the Year voting for a reason. All of this, it could be a little dysfunctional in Boston. We're going to look at some of the other biggest competitors in the Eastern Conference here in a minute. But first, David, let's tell listeners about Rocket Money.
Oh, Rocket Money. I mean, we might remember them before as another name, Truebill. But if you're wasting money on subscriptions, 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about. Maybe for you, it's an unused Amazon Prime account or even a subscription to a local paper, Hulu account that never gets streamed. This is a great app that I use that helps me track all of my expenses. And because of it, I no longer waste money on subscriptions I don't even use. It's called Rocket Money. Do you know how much your subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend about $80 a month on subscriptions when the actual total is closer to 200 plus. The app shows you all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions you didn't even know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for a subscription. It's happened to my wife on occasion. To cancel the subscription, all you have to do is press cancel, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. Who doesn't want that, especially now around the holidays? That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. Now make your second listen game to game. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game NBA covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Before we move on to what has to go right for the Heat to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and then the NBA Finals, perhaps, we talked about Boston. The other guys, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, among that trio, who do you think is the stiffest competition for Miami? Who would you be most worried about in a potential playoff matchup?
That's a tough one to answer because the volatility of Brooklyn makes them a strong candidate, to be 100% honest with you. Like, I just don't know what to expect from this team because they've got that, top tier talent, whatever. They've got those scores. They've got a pretty well-rounded team on paper, but this is the first time they've ever actually done this. Like, this is a new version of this team, even from what they had last year or the year before that. So I don't know where that continuity is going to all of a sudden click, if it even does. Or, if Kyrie has a problem in the postseason, if there's an injury concern with Ben Simmons, who knows? So to me, they're the most dangerous competition, honestly. I think Miami could beat Milwaukee in 7 games. I think they could even challenge Philadelphia, despite the problems that Harden and or Joel Embiid pose in a playoff matchup. But I think it's Brooklyn, to be honest with you. That could be just the biggest X factor. That's why it's hard for me to predict.
I couldn't disagree with you more.
I'm not a believer in Brooklyn.
Maybe I'm wrong. For me to be actually fearful of Brooklyn, I have to see it first. I don't disagree with what you said. Like, the variance, the ceiling with them is greater than any team in the NBA, Eastern, Western Conference. There's not a team that if they hit their ceiling is better than Brooklyn. I just, the rule so far for the Brooklyn Nets has been they will collapse and implode somehow, some way. They will find a new way to implode. And so I have yet to be fearful of Brooklyn. I'm not saying that it's impossible by the time the playoffs roll around. But right now, the team that I'm looking at, that if you're the Heat and you want to try to avoid in the playoffs, is Milwaukee. I hate that matchup for Miami. Even Philadelphia. I love Philadelphia's roster this year. I might pick them even to get to the finals if we're going to make predictions. But if it's a specific matchup with the Sixers against the Heat, the one thing I know the Heat are going to do at the end of the game that the Sixers might not do is execute, right? And so that's like, if you're looking at one match, the one advantage that Miami has in a matchup against a Doc Rivers, James Harden-led Philadelphia team, it's the execution part of it, which I trust Miami to do and not Philadelphia. Again, like Brooklyn, they have to do it to prove it.
I know it's corny. But at the same time, like I just can't see Jimmy going out against the Bucks the same way he did a couple seasons ago.
I think that's going to be
a huge expectation.
I think that I'm glad you brought that up because I even want to go back further to the bubble. And ever since the Heat embarrassed the Bucks in 5 games in the bubble, I think Heat fans have always believed that the Heat are a good matchup. That's a good matchup against the Bucks. That the Heat have their number somehow. That they are able to beat the kind of the quote unquote favorites in the Eastern Conference and Giannis, the top player in the world. And I couldn't disagree more. I think, before I piss off Heat fans, I am not saying that the bubble run was a fluke. That is not what I am about to say. But I am about to use the word fluke. So please just don't overreact to me. But I think the manner in which the Heat beat the Bucks in the bubble was a little fluky. I am not saying it was a fluke that they beat the Bucks, but I think it was a fluke in how dominant they were.
Which is the most likely scenario? The way they got swept the second year, or the way they beat them in the bubble?
Swept. That's more likely. I never see
likely to you
as much as you just said that Jimmy Butler I can't see him losing to Milwaukee that same way. I can't see Giannis losing in 5 games to any team. It's just he's the best player on the planet. So I know that Chris Middleton is dealing with an injury at the beginning of the week, but it sounds like they're slow playing. Chris Middleton had offseason surgery that was kind of quietly, not really reported. But I'm as long as they're healthy, I just don't see a team beating Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Miami. Otherwise, I think that's a terrible matchup because the thing with Milwaukee is that everything Miami does really well, Milwaukee can do and do better. And that's a really tough matchup. That's a really tough matchup when you're just trying to beat the team that does all the things you do, but better. They're mirror image. They give up both defenses give up a ton of threes by design. They both want to try to pressure the rim and get to the paint, and nobody does that better than Giannis. And Milwaukee's 3-point defense, they don't give it up from the corners the way that Miami did last year or even in the preseason. So I don't know. I think it's just a really tough matchup. I think Milwaukee ought to be the favorites over Boston. I really don't understand why they're not, but whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like Miami was close to getting to out of the Eastern Conference Finals, and yet they've dropped to 5th or 6th or whatever in a lot of people's view. Boston stays there, and it's like, oh, okay, no, they're clearly the better team, and they should be the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. It's a little odd how people view these teams, but that's okay. Miami finds a way to prove themselves in the playoffs as they always do.
We understand Miami being 5th. I think just to put a bow on this part of the conversation, Miami being 5th in terms of Vegas odds, I think you and I we're good with it. We understand it, whatever. But we would take Miami and their chances in the playoffs, right? Like at plus 850, you're getting decent odds too. Way better than plus 425 on Brooklyn. Anyway, what has to go right for Miami to get as far as we're talking about? The first one, without a question, is health. That goes without saying. We don't need to get more into that, but I think you ultimately need 60 plus games probably from Jimmy and Lowry and Bam. Like that whole group needs to play 60 plus games, right? If we want to put a specific number on it.
I would say less out of Jimmy, to be honest with you, because I think that gives everybody else an opportunity to shine and develop, and that's something that Miami is thriving.
What's the minimum amount of games that they need from Jimmy?
50.
Okay, so 50, 60 games. I'm all right with that. If he plays 56 games, that's close enough. But I also think part of it is they have to get a top 4 seed in the East, right? This group that we just got done talking about, they've got to get ahead of them. They've got to have a leg up on them in terms of home court advantage or something. I think when the playoffs begin, having the 1 seed last year, that was a huge deal for Miami. That was really, really helpful. Having that game 7 at home against Boston. I mean, I think that was if Boston is in Boston, if the Celtics are in Boston for game 7, I wonder if they collapse the same way, at home. Probably not, right? So I think having home court advantage is huge. If they get the 1 seed, great. That's awesome. You can't. I don't expect them to have the 1 seed 2 years in a row. But if they get the top 4 seed, we think 50 games. You probably need to win 50 games to get a top 4 seed in the East this year. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, 53 was enough for the 1 seed last year, and I know the East in general has improved.
Yeah,
but yes, I think you could look at a team like Milwaukee flirting with 60. It's going to be a lot closer though. Like, I mean, think about the disparity. You could have 4 teams with 50 plus wins. I mean, that seems a little tough to even imagine mathematically. I'm sure we might be missing something there in those terms. But yeah, I mean,
and you're not going to have a ton of teams bottoming out, right? I think who are the teams that are tanking in the Eastern Conference? Most of the Wembanyama tankers are in the Western Conference. You'll have a couple, maybe Charlotte decides to flush the toilet midseason, Washington, and you get some easy wins here and there. But for the most part, I don't think wins even like beyond that top group. We just talked about Cleveland, Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago. Even the Knicks are they're going to be like a 500 team this year probably. Like none of these wins are going to be easy in the East.
It could be 48 to 55 wins defining whether you've got the one seed in the playoffs.
Yeah,
7-game span there where it could be the number one seed in the Eastern Conference or, missing home court advantage altogether. Like it could be that close.
I think
for me, like one of the things that has to happen is they've got to get off to an incredible hot start. Like their home stand to start the season, 4 games at home is crucial. They have to win every one of those games, including a much anticipated matchup against the Boston Celtics as the second game of the season. And you've got 10 of the first 14 games at home. And then after that, it's absolutely brutal. 17 of 26 games on the road. So you're at the midway point of the season, 40 games in, and you've played 21 games away, 19 at home, and then 23 of the last 42 at home. You've got to take advantage of that home court advantage early on, because if not, you might find yourself looking up in the playoff standings, and that's not a good place for Miami to be.
That's a really good number. I hadn't even thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right. Like it's really important to get off to a hot start here. I mean, I agree. I think it's going to be so flat at the top of the Eastern Conference where it's only going to be a handful of games separating the 1 seed. I mean, Boston, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, that's 4. Miami, Cleveland, Atlanta, Toronto, that's 8 teams. To get out of the play-in, you need to be a top 6 seed. 2 of those teams are going to be in the play-in tournament. And if you asked any of those teams, hey, like if you go up to any, you got a chance to make the play-in, they're going to be like, what? Us in the play-in? No, Cleveland. We just traded for Donovan Mitchell. We were on a 50-win pace before Jared Allen got hurt. Atlanta, we were in the conference finals 2 years ago. We got Trae Young. We just brought in DeJounte Murray. We're deep. We like our guys. But 2 of those teams are going to be in the play-in tournament. So
that's ridiculous. It's
Miami, we talking about them getting a top 4 seed. They could be in the play-in. Like they could. Ooh. So I think number 1, you have to avoid the play-in. You probably have to, if you're Miami, at least get a top 4 seed in the East. And like you said, it's going to be tough. Tyler Herro, Bam Adebayo, Victor Oladipo. Which one of them is the biggest X factor for the Heat this season? We're going to talk about that next. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for football betting information this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis from your favorite betting website. Everything you can find. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports betting information. Live in-game betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Let's look at tonight's Monday Night Football matchup. Broncos-Chargers. Broncos getting 4.5 points in Los Angeles. I don't think that the Chargers get much of a home field advantage, but I don't like what I've seen from Russell Wilson and the Broncos. Maybe this is a right game for their offense. Who knows? 4.5 points. Maybe I'll take the points. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, back here with Locked on Heat. We have an announcement here that I am about to pull up, and this is great radio. To help Heat fans get ready for the upcoming season, Official League, the fastest growing sports merch company, is launching an exclusive limited edition hat inspired by Miami Heat star Bam Adebayo and designed by viral artist NBA Paint. There's only 100 available of this hat for purchase at officialleague.com, and new silhouettes are coming out all the time featuring food characters inspired by each player. Bam Adebayo, as you know, is Ham Adebayo, and there's even better news. You don't have to buy one. You can get one for free. All you have to do is leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and then email that screenshot of the review to lockedonheat@gmail.com. We are also accepting those screenshots via Instagram, DM, Twitter, however you want to do it. The only catch is that you have until Bam attempts at least 18 shots in a game. Once he does that, we're going to close entries. The Heat play Wednesday night and they play Friday night. So get those reviews in now before the season begins so you can have your hat for the full regular season. Email a screenshot of your 5-star rating and review to lockedonheat@gmail.com for a chance to win an Official League Bam Adebayo hat.
I think he reaches that on Wednesday against the Bulls.
I think you're right. If you look at his per 36 numbers, because he didn't play a full allotment of minutes in the preseason, he's there. He's right there. It was like 17.5 shot attempts per game in the preseason. He was averaging per 36. So he's probably going to do it Wednesday.
Vucevic, but
it's also
Vucevic is not defending Bam.
No, it's a good matchup for Bam. It's a good matchup for Bam. I mean, he's going to 1 Euro step and he's around Vooch. Those cinder block legs that he's got. I think let's just continue what has to go right for Miami before we move into the biggest X factors here. I think the other thing that we needed to, I think you need a bounce back year from Kyle Lowry. That kind of goes hand in hand with health a little bit. That we've talked about that enough. The last thing And I think maybe Heat fans think about this as a swing factor, and I think I ultimately did too. But the more you dig into it, the more I think it's true. To get to the finals, Tyler Herro has to be a top 35 player in the NBA. Tyler Herro has to be an all-star this year. I think to get as far as the Heat want to go, Tyler Herro has to make the all-star team. And I don't see a way around it. The reason I say that is I think the best comp for the Heat, going back to what we said, they don't have that top-end superstar, top 5 guy in the league, right? But they do. They're deep, and they have a bunch of really good guys. And I think the best comp for them is like the 2019 Toronto Raptors that were led by Kawhi. Just unbelievable playoff series for Kawhi. I think Jimmy Butler is able to replicate just going ham in the postseason and just kind of putting a run like that together. But also got a bunch of support from Kyle Lowry, from Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka. It was just a deep Norman Powell off the bench. It was such a deep team. And you kind of I looked at that roster. They had one top 10 player, Kawhi, 3 top 30 players, right? I think Lowry that year and Ibaka, or not Ibaka, Pascal Siakam. Those were like your top, in addition to Kawhi, those were your top 30 guys. 4 top 45 guys, which I think back then you could put Marc Gasol as a top 45, 50-ish player in the league. That was probably like the last year he was there.
Yeah.
And then 6 guys I thought in the top 80 that year. Okay? So, and that includes Danny Green, Van Vliet, like all these guys. That's what it's going to take. I think this Heat roster has one guy in the top 10, and I'm just going to put Jimmy Butler in there. We don't really have to debate it, but we're going to throw him in there. I think they have 2 guys in the top 30. I think it's Jimmy and Bam. And I think if you look at the top 4, I don't even know that they have anybody else in the top 45. That's why you need a bounce back year from Kyle Lowry. If he bounces back and he's in shape, he's a top 45 guy, I think, still, with all the intangibles and everything he brings on the court, even if he's not scoring 18 a game. I think it's fine. And then Tyler Herro has to be in that top 30. He has to leapfrog top 45. Right now, according to ESPN, SI, they both have him ranked 61. I think The Athletic has him somewhere similar. That's a 20-plus spot leap. And that's going to be what it takes to, I think, be an all-star. But look, if he averages 20 points a game in the starting lineup, those are all-star caliber numbers, and he can get there. So I think that's what has to go right. Tyler Herro has to make that leap right now, even before the extension kicks in next season.
It's got to be more than that. I think points per game at the very least, just to get that kind of recognition and to start becoming considered one of the higher echelon players. First of all, defensively, yes, you have to make some leap there. You can't just be
can't be as bad as he was last year.
Yeah. You can't. I mean, Bradley Beal has gone there despite some defensive issues, but he's also a pretty solid playmaker, and he also puts up near 30 points per game.
Yeah, he's averaging 30. Right.
And then even then people consider, that he might still be a fringe all-star player. So for Tyler to make that leap, he's got to average 25 plus. Like that's
I think 24 is the number. I think you're right. I think I agree with you 100%. Yeah, with the Bradley Beal thing, it was like good stats on a bad team. Tyler Herro has to have good stats on a good team, right? And so I'm not trying to take anything away from Bradley Beal, neither are you, but it's I think 24-25 is about right, and just a little bit better defensively. And by the way, playing with the starters, that'll cover up some of those deficiencies on defense too. And he did look better defensively in the preseason. Small sample.
Absolutely.
And not a sample that is super significant, but whatever. You take what you can get. I think that so you agree. Tyler Herro absolutely has to be an all-star caliber or an all-star team this year for Miami to have a chance.
Yeah, and I don't even know about Kyle's leap into the top 45, but close to, if not, I mean, at least top 80-ish. I don't think he's even considered there by most people around the NBA at this point in her career. There's a lot of concerns there. I'm expecting the bounce back, as you mentioned before.
Lowry was right. I'll let you continue here, but I'm just, for a point of information, Lowry was ranked in like the 60-ish range, according to ESPN Sports Illustrated. So I do think he's still like a top 60-ish player. I think there's enough respect for what it is that Kyle Lowry can do and understanding what that last season was for him.
Sure. I mean, somebody on the bench has to step up, and I'm not sure who that's going to be, but it's something that we'll talk about. And maybe that's more of a swing factor too. So maybe we should get into this. Yeah,
let's do it. And let's just get right into it. I think those guys, when you start to look at the top 80, like who's the guy that can kind of just pop this year? And I do wonder if it's probably Victor Oladipo, the one last big name we haven't mentioned. If he could get right and find a defined role that makes sense for him and that he could thrive in, he's never going to be the star that he was. I just don't think that opportunity will ever come his way again. He's still plenty talented. There's nothing against him. I'm not saying that, but I just don't see him being the focal point that he was with the Pacers ever again in his career, and especially not with the Heat. But if he could be a star in his role, sort of like what Andre Iguodala was for Golden State during their run, I think that's a perfect sort of outcome for Vic. And that's a top 80 player minimum, right? Like that, Andre Iguodala should have won Sixth Man of the Year. It's a crime that he never did. And if you can get that kind of production and impact from Victor Oladipo, that would be huge, and that would be a swing factor for the Heat.
Yeah, I agree. So much kind of hinges on him. And he scares me a lot, just like the overall consideration of where Oladipo fits into Miami's long-term plans, or long-term for this season, I mean. Like, the variance levels for Oladipo are so high that it's hard to exactly envision how he's able to continue to progress at the same level where he makes that impact that we expect or think he's capable of having. And that's what scares me, is that if he embraces his role and he finds his footing and finds his rhythm, and that's a huge concern for him, is that he's not quite sure exactly how he fits on this roster right now. But if he gets to that point and understands what it takes for him to be a productive player off the bench, even maybe on occasion, and I think that's going to be the opportunity for him, is that he's going to close games too. He's going to be the defensive player. He's going to be out there in place of Caleb Martin on occasion. I think if he earns that. Yeah, if he earns that considered amount of playing time there. So if he's that kind of player, then you're right. Iguodala comps feel right. But then there's the other side of the equation, right? Where he's like disgruntled because he doesn't have that rhythm, or because he can't find it. The shot is never going to return. The explosiveness never returns. He's not able to get past that initial line of defenders. And if that's the case, then what's he doing out there? He's an adequate playmaker. He can score, but if it doesn't coalesce, if he doesn't become at least a solid shooter, more often than not, then he's a problem out there on the floor. And that's the concern too, is that
he's going to need to be able to,
you've got to find somebody else to take over.
He's going to have to space the floor. You're absolutely right. Like the difference between him and Iguodala is that Iguodala was playing with Steph and Clay and KD. He never needed to space the floor. Oladipo's going to have to space the floor for this team and play awesome on-ball defense, awesome off-ball defense, and use that basketball IQ.
Is that where Duncan and Max come in and play a role, right? Is that where they
maybe
could potentially come off on the bench?
Yeah, but if we're talking about Oladipo kind of filling in with the starters there, he needs to. But you're right. I think the other guy, by the way, is one of Max Strus and Duncan Robinson. I think one of them have to become kind of in that top 80, 90 range. I think one of them has to pop a little bit more. Again, they both already popped. They need to pop again. More pops. You mentioned Victor Oladipo, and what happens if it just doesn't really work out? Well, I think he gets traded, right? And the Heat try to make a move, and I think that's the other swing factor, is do the Miami Heat make a trade midseason? Oladipo's contract is super tradable. Dwayne Dedmon's contract is super tradable. Caleb Martin's contract even. We know I don't anticipate him getting moved, but it's a tradable deal. Nikola Jovic, we don't expect him to get moved, but it's a tradable deal. The other thing I want to talk about too, and we've done enough of the names, right? Like, and I think when we're talking about swing factor, we're not talking about, are you going to get Jay Crowder? That's not a swing factor. The reason they haven't made that trade is because it's not a swing factor. I'm talking about if Washington decides to flush the toilet and move off of Bradley Beal. And Bradley Beal, as we know, has that anywhere but Miami trade clause. So the other one would be Damian Lillard.
Not official, by the way. That's not. You haven't read the contract, and it's not written that way. But
I might as well. That's what it is. It's gonna be that or LA. Damian Lillard. Everything you're hearing from Lillard is that he's never going to move from Portland. He wants to win a ring there, but you and I and everybody listening to this knows he'll never win a ring in Portland. So does he eventually come to that realization? I don't know. And then ask out, maybe, I don't know. By the way, Damian Lillard is the perfect partner for Bam Adebayo. I can't imagine. That's Draymond and Steph would be Bam and Damian Lillard. Or close to it, closest version of it. Zach Levine, if it goes weird for the Bulls early, do they try to move off of him? I have a hard time seeing them move Zach Levine. I think they'll obviously try to move like Vucevic and DeRozan before that, but I don't think any of those guys really move the needle for Miami. They would be calling about Zach Levine. These are just names. There's no reporting around this. These are just names I'm throwing out there, but we've talked about them before. The one thing I do want to say is if one of those guys does become available, there's this idea that's going around in local media too, that because Tyler Herro signed this extension, that he is untradeable, virtually untradeable. If anybody's going to figure out how to, the poison pill provision is not untradeable by like definition in the CBA. It's just really difficult to trade because the outgoing salary is this year's salary for Tyler Herro, which is like $5.7 million, while the incoming salary has to be matching to the average of the new extension. So it's just from a salary, and all trades in the NBA have to match salary. And so just from right there, you're behind the 8 ball trying to match salary, and it just becomes really difficult. If anybody's going to figure it out, it's Andy Ellisberg.
Sure.
We have seen him make the, I'm not saying that Tyler Herro, you know that I don't want Tyler Herro to get traded. I love Tyler Herro being on this roster. He's one of my favorite players to watch on Miami. I'm just not ready to say it's impossible for him to get traded. I'm just not ruling it out. If Andy Ellisberg and the Heat really want to get something done, they'll figure something out. All right.
Talk about variance, though. We're talking about him being an all-NBA player and then talking about trading him within the same segment.
I mean, if his first 30 games don't go well and they're like, wow, this guy can't start on a champion team, And maybe they say, you know what? Maybe we were wrong to give him the extension. I don't know. I'm just throwing hypotheticals out there. Last X factor, David. We keep talking about Miami sort of improving the back end of this roster. Take that depth and get that depth even better to bolster, Bam and Jimmy and Tyler to a different degree. But what if this team did become top heavy, and not via trade, but through internal improvement? And I think the only guy that can really kind of make a huge leap to get into that top 15 is Bam Adebayo, right? Jimmy Butler is what he is. He's not getting better. He's not necessarily getting worse right now. Tyler Herro, we thought, can get better, but he's not taking a leap into like the upper echelon of players right now. He is not, unfortunately, in the same conversation as Luka Doncic. But Bam Adebayo has the talent. He's got that raw ability. He's already one of the best defenders in the league, if not the best defender in the league. He averaged 19 points a game last year, which people forget. If he's going to take 18 shots a game on efficient looks and average 20-plus points a game, you look at the rankings right now, ESPN, The Athletic, Sports Illustrated, they all have him in the 25-ish range. I think ESPN has him at 22. But if he takes another huge leap and ends up in the top 12, what other teams can claim 2 players in the top 12 outside of Miami? The Lakers, if Anthony Davis bounced back. Maybe Philly, if you get a good James Harden year. Brooklyn, if you get like a normal, like if Kyrie Irving kind of looks more like what he did in his last year in Cleveland than he has ever since then.
A long time. Yeah.
That's it, right? There's not a whole lot of teams that can claim that kind of top level talent.
I would love to see that so much. Like, to be honest with you, that is one of the things I'm anticipating or looking forward to the most, is seeing Bam take that leap. I am a believer. I think we've been pretty consistent in saying that the attacks on Bam, or the negativity thrown at Bam, has been unnecessary. Like, he plays at such a high level and makes such a huge impact in so many different aspects. But I know why Heat fans are frustrated about the lack of aggression, or the perceived lack of aggression and things of that sort. If he can just finally put that to rest, and all the indications are, not just from everything he said, but also everything he's shown over the course of the preseason, is that he is poised to make exactly that leap that you're talking about. We're talking about exactly an all NBA level player that it can win Defensive Player of the Year, that makes plays on offense for others, gets everybody involved, the best, most versatile defender in the NBA, and also a 22, 23 point per game scorer at the very least.
Yeah.
Like, he has that potential. That's fantastic. That's exactly what would put Miami over the top, I think. I
mean, if he averages, let's call it between 15 and 18 shots a game, because he averaged 13 shots a game last year, and now he's scoring, let's call it 21, 22 points a game. Defensive Player of the Year caliber defense, that's a top 20 player. I think that's the leap that most people expect, is top 25-ish to top 20, right? Right in that range. I think we're expecting that. But there is a big difference between like 18th, 19th, 20th best player in the league to 11th, 12th best player in the league. That's a huge difference. The last player I could think of that made that leap was probably Kawhi, where in San Antonio for like the first 5 years there, he was a guy that could be your offense. Like, he could go out and score 18-9, but he wasn't really creating it on his own a whole lot. That was more like Tony Parker, Manu, and Tim Duncan, and the Spurs offense, Boris Diaw creating for him. But playing, all NBA defense as well, and just sort of being a plug-in guy. Bam has surpassed being the plug-in guy now. He's like that year right before Kawhi broke through and ended up being we were talking about Kawhi as the best player in the league for a couple of years. I don't know that that'll ever happen for Bam as like number one in the league, but I'm trying to think of a comparable guy who is sort of just hovering in that 20 to 30 range for a couple of years, and then just sort of boom, one more big, huge leap into the top 10-ish range. Is there anybody you can think of?
Top 10.
Top
Tatum
12-ish?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe even Brown, I think, is the expectation for him, is that he could make that leap too.
Maybe, but we haven't seen it. And he has to dribble first. He has to learn how to dribble first. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Not impossible. I still think that the best version of this Heat team is Bam Adebayo being their best player, at least in the regular season. All right. Anything else? Anything else when we before we wrap up our roadmap out of the Eastern Conference?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it in terms of like their seeding and everything else like that. I've got Miami as the 4th seed. I see them messing up against the Cavs as the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. And
who drops out of your top 5 then?
Brooklyn.
Okay.
Brooklyn is 6th just because of the volatility. But I also have them knocking off the Philadelphia 76ers, the 3rd seed in the first round of the playoffs. So that's it. So
you got it all figured out, don't you?
Yeah, I have Boston in the 4 over Atlanta, the 7th seed. Milwaukee in 5 over Toronto, the 8th seed.
Okay.
And then Milwaukee versus Miami, and then Miami takes that in 7.
Ooh.
And then they match up in the Eastern Conference Finals versus the Boston Celtics or Brooklyn Nets. I'm not sure exactly who's going to win that next series, but that's going to be interesting.
Nostra Davis.
Davis.
Nostra Davis. Nostra
Yeah.
Davis. Nostra Davis. There it is. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. The NBA season is here, and our local NBA experts and insiders have you covered on and off the court all season long. All the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. David does the Monday night, Tuesday morning show. Me and Adam do the Thursday night, Monday or Friday morning show. So make sure you are subscribed all season to Locked On NBA, available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts.